Father Jason here. Welcome back to another episode. I think this is our fifth one for Respect Life Month, looking at the inconsistency of the pro abortion position and the consistency of the pro life position in favor of life, mother, and child. You've probably heard of the pro abortion argument that, the fetus does not have any rights because, it just isn't viable. Now, let's take a look at that. If viability, whatever they mean by that, living independently, I think, if viability is an argument in favor of determining whether this is a living person with full rights, then what are we to say about, I don't know, let's say your neighbor who all of a sudden goes into a coma and is dependent on somebody else to, feed, clothe, and maintain their overall hygiene. Does that person who's in a coma for 5 days, let's say, cease being a person, cease being alive? No. Their personhood, their humanity hasn't diminished in any way during this period when they are dependent upon the help of another. And it's the same with a preborn human being. Yeah, they're dependent upon others. They're dependent upon the mother, obviously. They're dependent upon, if the mother is ill, the medical team that's taking care of the mother. Doesn't mean that they are not human beings. If we push this a little further, it becomes very absurd. For example, we know that children who are 23 weeks, 22 weeks even in utero can live outside of the womb. Now, if you went back to 1970, for example, the technology didn't exist at that time, and there would be no quote-unquote viability for that child who was 22, 23 weeks in utero. Therefore, are we to believe that children at that point of development in 1970 were not human beings? But now, because scientific developments have enabled them to be viable at 22 weeks, 23 weeks in utero, that all of a sudden now they're to be considered human beings? It doesn't make sense. Or you can change it and say, what about different locations? So, for example, a child in an advanced Western society at 22 weeks in, let's say, Los Angeles or Houston or Brussels, they can exist. They can live. A mother can go into labor at 22, 23, 24 weeks, and there are examples of those babies not only existing but growing up and having perfectly wonderful, flourishing lives. But that doesn't exist, for example, if they're in Djibouti or in Bangladesh or Mozambique or the Kalahari Desert. Viability, instead of it being 22, 23 weeks in those countries, it may very well be 33 weeks. So here's the absurdity of it. If viability is the basis of their argument, then someone who gets on an airplane in New York City, pregnant, a woman who's pregnant, and flies to Mozambique, all of a sudden she gets off the airplane in Mozambique and that child in her womb is not human anymore because children at 22 weeks in utero are not viable in Mozambique. Therefore, the child isn't human. She gets on an airplane, goes back to Los Angeles or Houston or wherever she's from, and this child is this 22-week-old in utero fetus is now a human. It doesn't make sense. This argument for viability doesn't make sense. I'll tell you what does make sense is this. If it's alive, then no argument, no justification can be used to directly take that innocent life. If it's not a life, then you don't need any argument to justify what you do with it. The evidence is rather clear, however, is that it is a life. It's a little human being developing, swimming in the mother's womb, and nothing justifies taking that beautiful little life.